Our complete library of episodes is available for free at spotlightonpodcast.com/episodes. There you'll find all of our conversations stretching back to our launch in February of 2020. Check it out. Hello and welcome to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today the spotlight shines on Andy McCluskey, the singer, songwriter, musician, and producer, best known as the lead singer and bass guitarist of the band Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, also known as OMD. Andy has been the group's sole constant member and joined Spotlight On producer and guest host Michael Donaldson to talk a bit about topics as varied as the political messages behind their latest work, Kraftwerk, and the Bauhaus Art School. OMD is not working the nostalgia circuit, though no one would blame them if they were. Instead, they continue to release new music that fans and critics alike rate with the best of their classics, and they already have plans to spend a large portion of 2025 on the road. Their latest EP, Kleptocracy, is out now. And so now, I hand it over to Michael Donaldson in discussion with OMD's Andy McCluskey.
One thing I want to start out with, you may be aware of this, I don't know, but a very close friend of mine owns Florian Schneider's Volkswagen.
Okay.
It's a long story how he acquired it, but he basically shipped it all the way from Germany to Tampa, Florida. And it was already in great condition, and he basically drives it around like a Sunday driver.
What a great Sunday car to have, huh?
I know, afraid to drive it around any other time, and has shown it at a couple of car shows.
Well, it's in the right climate now.
Yes, with Kraftwerk bellowing out of it, and I think he's even won some awards with it.
Oh, I'd love to see that. That would be fantastic.
That brings me to another thing. This is a story that I've related to a lot of people. I was having an under-the-weather day and decided to watch 2 BBC documentaries back to back for 4 hours worth of just sitting on the couch and enjoying myself. The first was Krautrock, the rebirth of Germany. And it ends with Kraftwerk basically about to take over the world. As soon as that ended, I started Synth Britannia, which begins with Kraftwerk playing Liverpool. So it was funny watching those together because it was like 1 4-hour documentary sort of leading to this.
Well, I mean, essentially Krautrock led into the British synth explosion of the late 70s and early 80s. So they belong together.
Absolutely. And of course, you had the moment of seeing them in Liverpool as the life-changing moment for you and Paul as well.
Now, Paul wasn't allowed out by his mother. Paul was only 15.
Oh, so it was just you.
Yes. He's been so pissed off about that ever since.
So you basically dragged him along into the cult of Kraftwerk.
And effectively, it became a symbiotic relationship, actually. I would go to Liverpool on a Saturday morning with my paper round money and buy German imports, very usually Kraftwerk, from this one rack of 12-inch vinyl in Probe Records in Liverpool, which was the kind of the really cool shop in Liverpool. And then I would come back to where we lived in a suburb on the other side of the river. Paul, who was studying electronics, who was an electronics geek, had built himself a stereo. I only had my mother's old 60s mono record player. So Paul had a stereo. So that was it. I had the records, he had the stereo. That was how we started listening to music together in his mum's house on a Saturday afternoon when she was at work. And then we took the next crazy step to say, wow, could we make something like this? Of course, the reality was we couldn't because we didn't have any money. So we were playing my upside-down bass guitar, and he'd cannibalized some of his auntie's radios for the circuits and just made these weird, what we just used to call noise machines. And
right.
We were very noisy and ambient for the best part of a year until we finally got an electric piano and an organ.
What brought you to the German imports? How did you discover those at a young age?
I think, like a lot of English teenagers in the 70s, I was looking for something new, looking for something different. I wanted something that was mine. I didn't want something that reflected what I already perceived as Anglo-American rock cliches.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you want to avoid Anglo-American rock cliches, then you discover Kraftwerk. And I heard Autobahn on the radio in the summer of 1975. It was everything I could possibly have wanted. It was new. It was different. It was musical to my ears. I thought it sounded fantastic, but it was completely different from everything else I'd ever heard before in my life. And so that was it. I then started going and buying their records. And then when I'd exhausted all the ones of theirs that I hadn't previously purchased, I then started buying La Düsseldorf and Neu and Can and all the various other German bands. And this fulfilled my search for something that was new music, that was different. A certain type of teenager. I think it's different now because we're in the postmodern cultural world. But at the time, everything was perceived as linear. This is in fashion, therefore that's out of fashion. And then the new fashion becomes old fashioned and something new takes its place. I was looking to define myself by the things that were the three markers, which were the music, the haircut, and the clothes. And Kraftwerk was my music. I did like a few other artists, but again, they were towards the more interesting end of the spectrum. People like Bowie and Roxy Music and Brian Eno and the Velvet Underground. I mean, quite frankly, outside of my German bands and those ones I just mentioned, everything else was shit as far as I was concerned.
A similar experience for me, because I grew up in a little rural town in the middle of Louisiana.
You lucky boy.
Yeah. And I just had to find any music that was the opposite of what everyone around me was listening to. And for me, it was punk rock for a while. And then I happened to, in a record store, met a guy who had this amazing record collection. And he was the one who was like, oh, check out this band Faust, take this home and listen to it. I was hooked on the German stuff from then on. So here's a dangerous question, though, for someone from Liverpool. Do you think Kraftwerk is the most influential band?
Oh, I'm on record as saying that throughout the history of modern popular music post-Second World War, Kraftwerk are the most influential band in the world. The Beatles were very, very, very good songwriters, and the journey they went on was quite remarkable. The changes in their music from the early poppy days to the kind of surrealist, acid later days was remarkable. But essentially, it was still variations on the Anglo-American blues rock theme, whereas Kraftwerk completely detonated all the cliches and did something totally new as far as I'm concerned. And they heralded the advent of electronics in music, for better or for worse, the use of the computer and digital. So as far as I'm concerned, Kraftwerk are the most important band in the history of popular music.
You are on record.
Good.
So sticking in that period a little bit, who were the id?
The id. Paul and I had known each other since he had moved to my school when he was 7 years old. We were in different academic years, so we knew each other, but we weren't close friends. And then one day, just after my 16th birthday, he and a bunch of his long-haired hippie friends came knocking on my door, and I recognized him. I didn't know the others because he went to a different secondary school to me after the age of 11. He said, "Hi, listen, these are my friends. They've got a band, and they're looking for a bass player. I've seen you walking around the park with a bass guitar," which, doesn't everybody. I just bought a bass guitar with my birthday money, with all the money I could scrape together, went to a secondhand store, and I brought this bright red Wilson Rapier bass. And of course, I was walking around the local park going, "Oh, hi, yeah, how are you doing? Oh, my bass. Oh, you noticed I've got, yes, that's my new bass guitar. I just got over my shoulder. You noticed it, yeah?" As you do. So he'd seen me, and he and his friends came knocking on the door. And so his friends were in a band, and I started playing bass with them. Two things then happened. One, they realized with me singing backing vocals that I was better than the lead singer they currently had.
Oops.
So they asked me if I would take over on lead vocals. And I said, "Well, you have to tell Graham that he's no longer in the band. He's your mate, not mine. I'm not telling him." But also, I think because they lived a few miles away and Paul lived very, very close to my house, Paul and I would spend time together on Saturdays if we weren't rehearsing with the band, because we very often couldn't afford to get together the £1.50 to rent the room above the library on a Saturday to rehearse. And so Paul and I started this interest, as I said, in electronic music. Once he got some keyboards, we decided to put him into the band, and that's when it got properly named The Id. And we did actually play a couple of gigs. There was myself and my then girlfriend, Julia Neal, and my old friend, also on vocals, John Floyd. It was pretty kind of 70s prog rock. But Paul and I were starting to write the songs. Because we had a drum kit and two guitarists, they tended to make our song sound more conventional than we would have wanted, but we didn't really have an option at the time until a few years later, when everybody else was going to university. We got up the courage to get rid of them, get a tape recorder to replace them, and do it the way we wanted it to be in October of 1978. And that was when we started Orchestral Manoeuvres.
So you've known Paul since he was 7, right? I'm just always fascinated by artists that have been in a working relationship with each other for that long, like for over 50 years for you two. What is that like? I mean, I can't imagine being in a continuing working relationship with like my good friends from when I was 10 years old.
No, I mean, it is strange. I'm not close to any other friends I was at school with, but obviously Paul and I, because we started the band, we started making music together when he was 50 and I was 16, and then we started the band a few years later. We're very different people. It's not always plain sailing. We've had our disagreements. And in fact, the band split up from 1990 to 2006.
Right.
When we fit together, we bring to the table what the other one doesn't have. Paul is an incredibly gifted musician. He's a brilliant writer of melodies. He knows more than I do about musical theory, which is good. He's much more technically gifted and patient than I am, so he does the mixing. I, on the other hand, kind of full of intensity, full of ideas. I was going to do a fine art degree. He was going to do an electronics job. You know, there's the difference between the two of us, but it fits together. So I guess I was just blessed with the one great thing about Paul, which was fortunate for me, was he was he still is a very creative musician, but he's not overly precious or egotistical. So he would allow me to make whatever I wanted out of his ideas as well as my ideas. It was a double blessing for me. We have joked as well that we are different characters, and two Pauls would get nothing done and two Andys would kill each other. So, you know,
I've read your nicknames for each other, the Butcher and the Surgeon.
Yes, they hold up.
So the fine arts degree that you talked about, as a painter, or what was your craft within fine arts?
It was, by the time I got old enough to go to apply to university, it was more sculptural, installations and conceptual. I was quite fortunate to just pass my A-level art, which is my kind of the end of school art exam. I wasn't particularly gifted at drawing. The painting I did used a lot of cut-up bits of magazine and newspaper, which they decided wasn't legally allowed. And I wrote my thesis piece about Dada in the style of Dadaism, which made it largely unreadable. So I scraped through with the lowest grade you can get, which is an E pass.
Man, you were like ahead of the curve on AI generation there, weren't you?
I was certainly trying to be my own difficult self. So, I got a place at Leeds to do sculpture. I chose Leeds because they had a sort of recording studio as well, so I could do audio installations as well. I took a gap year, and that was when Paul and I started Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark in October 78. I have subsequently discovered that had I gone to Leeds on the same course at the same time, would have been Green Gartside, the lead singer of Scritti Politti.
Right. Okay.
And Dave Ball and Mark Almond, who created Soft Cell. We would have all been there. And I jokingly said to Mark Almond last summer when we were doing festivals with him, I said, would it have been a supergroup or a super ego clash? And he went, probably the latter, Andy. I went, you're probably right.
I love the fine arts thing because that is definitely something that is a major part of the OMD aesthetic, like right from the beginning. Is Paul a part of that, or is that your direction mostly?
It's mostly mine, if I'm honest. Working with Peter Saville, who, of course, was the art director at Factory Records and then became the art director at Dindisc, which was the subsidiary of Virgin that we signed to, unbeknownst to us. Peter and ourselves ended up accidentally at the same record company after Factory, which was brilliant. Peter said he enjoyed working with me because I understood what he was talking about. If he referenced futurists or Picasso or pop art, I knew what he was talking about. So I had the frame of reference. So generally the artwork was, I would be more involved than Paul. Again, on the technical and mixing side, particularly these days, it's more Paul than me. I wouldn't claim to dare to go anywhere near doing a finished mix. I'll tinker with it once Paul's got it nearly done. But yeah, the artwork has generally been my element. And particularly recently, actually, since we reformed, a lot of our music and our titles and our themes have been influenced by artwork.
Yeah, I do know that being a teenager, seeing the records in the bins. I mean, this is pretty much the case with any of the Peter Saville stuff, really. But I used to describe it as almost like receiving messages from outer space, because here I'm this kid in Louisiana and I see these record covers and I'm just like, what is this? And it was like the wonderful days of buying records without hearing them, just buying them because of the cover.
Well, you know what? The amazing thing is that I used to take the train to Liverpool and come back on the train. And I was sitting on the train with the sleeve, opening it up, looking at the artwork, pulling out the inner sleeve, reading the lyrics, reading the song titles. And all of this in the sort of hour to 45 minutes before I got it on the turntable. It was like record sleeve foreplay. You know, before you got to the main event, you've already been absorbing the sleeve and getting yourself so excited by it.
Do you visit museums on tour?
I do try to when I've got the energy. The older I get, the more I find that I'm a bit of a zombie on tour. I tend to sleep a lot when I'm not on stage. But yes, I have been blessed with the opportunity to travel the world and go to all sorts of art galleries and museums. When I've got a day off, there's nothing worse than if I haven't got a day off and I can't go and see a gallery I really want to go to. But it is what it is.
Do you have any favorites?
I'm a huge fan of MoMA in New York. I love the Met as well in New York and the Noise Gallery in New York. I could spend a month going to art galleries in New York. Chicago's got some amazing paintings as well.
I have a past life as a touring musician, and I used to go to art galleries, and it was always fun to see a work go from one gallery to another.
Oh, yeah?
I'd pop into one gallery and I'd see this work that I saw an exhibition that I saw in a gallery maybe a year prior, and it'd be like, oh, it's like running across an old friend almost. It's
great, isn't it? Because I mean, that, you know, galleries depend upon borrowing from other institutions for their big exhibitions. The downside of that, of course, is that when you go specifically to see a painting in a gallery and it's not there because they've lent it to another museum.
Right.
We'll be back with more Spotlight On right after this break. Other than the podcast itself, the best way to stay in touch with our various goings-on is to be on our mailing list. To sign up, go to spotlightonpodcast.com and click on Newsletter. Thanks. And now, back to Spotlight On.
Okay, so Bauhaus Staircase. This record's great, but I want to kind of get into what you mentioned earlier about the art influence on the title and the lyrics and such. And I looked up a description of the Bauhaus Stairway, Oscar Schlemmer. There was a listing in The Guardian, and I'll just quote it real quick because I thought this was really interesting. It says, the painting looks back at the Bauhaus as a utopia rooted in everyday life. These are ordinary modern young people, hair and clothes in contemporary fashions, walking purposefully, intently. They believe in what they are doing. They have the rounded, simplified geometrical bodies that Schlemmer created in his ballets as they ascend to the higher state of modern marionettes.
Very good description.
One thing I find really great about that is he's basically talking about people becoming robots.
Mm-hmm.
But like Kraftwerk, it's a positive thing.
Obviously, Oscar Schlemmer, who painted the painting, several years earlier had done the incredible costumes for the Triadic Ballet. You see them now, they're in the museum in Stuttgart, and if you see them now, they still look unbelievably crazy and futuristic, and they're now well over 100 years old. what was the title of the New Order song that French dance troupe did, where they were basically dressed like the characters out of the Triadic Ballet?
Oh, the True Faith, I think, wasn't it? Wasn't it True Faith?
Yeah. So, yeah, I think so. I think you're right. Yeah, I mean, essentially what Schlemmer is trying to do there, he's, for the sake of simplicity and clarity, he's trying to reduce forms down to simple shapes. It's reductive but beautiful. In no way is he suggesting that people should be robots or they should be minimized or reduced to robotic ways. As you say, they were actually young people who were exploring an interesting new future. The amazing thing about the Bauhaus art schools is that from 1919 to 1933, when it was closed down by the Nazis, it was an applied art school. It wasn't esoteric. It wasn't art for art's sake. It was actually practical application of art for form and function and design and architecture. And even so, the Nazis still shut it down, as totalitarian dictatorships are prone to do with art, because they're scared of it. They don't understand it. They fear that it might be saying something they don't understand about them. And often it is. And of course, I called it Staircase because it just, Stairway was too soft. Staircase had a nice punch to the rhythm of it. It needed that second syllable emphasizing.
So you've referred to this as your political album.
It has politics on it. We've been political before.
Oh, no,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. But obviously songs like Kleptocracy and Anthropocene and even Bauhaus Staircase in a way, which has...
You're lucky bastards. You're going to have a fucking president who's going to be a criminal, because this ain't going to stop him.
You know what? Do you know who Howard Dean was or is?
Yeah.
Do you remember when Howard Dean, all his presidential chances went away because he made a weird sound?
This is the incredible thing now, is that it's so brazen. The corruption, the narcissism. People used to do their dirty deals under the table. Now they're right on top of the table in broad daylight. And people just seem to accept that that's the way things are done now. It's utterly frightening.
Yeah, I refer to it as Grifter Nation.
Yeah.
I love the lyric, "I'm going to kick down fascist art." That might be my favorite lyric of the year.
Well, that one just came out. Obviously, I was thinking about Bauhaus and I was thinking about Nazis. And do you know what, Michael? The funny thing is, don't tell anybody, I have a soft spot for fascist propaganda art. The Russian posters and the Chinese
I am
propaganda.
obsessed with like Soviet art design. Absolutely.
Would I want to live in one of those totalitarian states? No, but my God, the art. It was stunningly powerful and beautiful. But of course, you had poor people like Malevich, who was basically one of the very first ever abstract artists, had to go back to doing art that was recognizably, specifically figurative, because otherwise his art would have been banned by Stalin and the communists. So yeah, I want to kick down fascist art is, and also as well, it's the idea of toppling statues, which we've seen several times over the last few centuries, of those dictatorship statues being knocked down or put into statue parks to remind us of our history.
You had mentioned earlier on this subject about art as something that the fascists or the authoritarians hate.
It's not just fascists, it's totalitarian communist regimes as well.
Right, absolutely. So does art help us maintain democracy, do you think?
Good question.
I have this idea
go on, you tell me your theory.
I have this idea of creation as resistance. I tell this to a lot of my artist friends who are understandably upset about the state of this country and the state of the world. And they get depressed and they've got horrible people living rent-free in their heads. They don't create because it's just hard for them to do, which again is understandable. But my idea is like, keep creating, because creation to me is inherently optimistic, because you're making something for an audience that does not yet exist for that piece. So you're thinking that there is a future for someone to enjoy your creation or to inspect your creation or whatever. Artistic creation in itself is an optimistic resistance. And to paraphrase something I read from Brian Eno that really hit home, he recently said that it is one responsibility of an artist, if they choose, to envision worlds that we want to live in so that we can perhaps arrive there.
I think you have a strong case. I mean, how effective it is in terms of actually changing the world, I'm not sure that art deals hammer blows against problem situations. However, it is very good for reflecting for engaging people to have an alternative mindset to what you might feel are situations that are not positive. That's obviously, why I love Dada, because it was a response to the slaughter and horror of the First World War. What was scary was that some of the English vorticists and the Italian futurists were excited about warfare. They thought, oh, yes, this is going to clean the slate. It's dramatic and powerful and shattered and strong and engineering. Of course, what came out of it was that Dada went, if this is the future, if this is where technology leads us, we don't want any part of this. If this is what intelligent minds lead us to, then let's be stupid. Let's go boing, boom, chack, and da, 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 and whatever, because it's as nonsensical as the sense that led us to the slaughter of the Great War. And obviously, it's been around for a long time through Guernica, but up until now, you still get art that's trying to guide us in a different way, or at least say something about the status quo and asking questions about it. And I've been furious, particularly at Trump and Boris Johnson, Putin, Saudi Arabia. Khashoggi goes into an embassy and comes out a few days later in different bags. Mm-hmm. And initially the world is like, oh, shocking, terrible, terrible. Oh, Saudi Arabia, how awful. And then they let the dust settle 6 months later and they're like, anyway, listen, we'd like some of your oil. Would you like some warplanes?
Again, it's like the thing about Howard Dean is he gave a speech and gave like this crazy woo, and it was mocked all over the place, shown on TV a million times. And that was the end of his presidential campaign. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how quaint, Yeah. And then Trump seems to luxuriate in all of his ills and wrongdoings. I think that it's hilarious that he's in court and nobody is saying he shouldn't be president because he's having sex with hookers. The Kennedys weren't exactly whiter than white, but they weren't so brazen about it. It's just the scary thing is that we've been so patently recently led by people they're not politicians in the sense that they want to actually do something for other people. Yes.
They're politicians who are just raging narcissists who want to be the president, who want to be the prime minister. The only difference between Boris Johnson and Trump was that Boris Johnson didn't actually want to do anything. He just wanted to call himself prime minister and then sit around doing fuck all and have somebody else do the work. The scary thing is that Trump's got lots of ideas that he'd like to enact when he's president, which just make the world worse. And he's already given you the poison chalice of the Supreme Court, and that was just in his first term.
Yep. All right. Time to call my therapist.
Yeah, me too.
So on that sort of note, Kleptocracy is the happiest song about all these subjects I can imagine.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever hear Enola Gay?
Yeah, exactly. There is obviously history that I'm sure you're mightily aware of, going back to Enola Gay and all that, of serious messages in danceable songs. Just this idea of like, not necessarily hiding the messages. It's almost like the movie that covers these really serious subjects, but does it in this entertaining way that not everyone picks up on it, but some people do, and gets under their skin in a good way. Is there any tension in what you're doing towards that with these songs?
There was no conscious endeavor when I wrote Enola Gay to sweeten the pill.
Mm-hmm.
After the event, I've talked about, if you try to be overly didactic, one, you end up making shit music because the lyrics don't rhyme properly or there's no melody or anything. And you're just beating people over the head with your words like a sermon. But secondly, yeah, it's a lot easier to get the medicine down if you put some sugar on it. But it wasn't conscious. It honestly was not conscious. And in fact, some people were quite horrified when Enola Gay was released. They were, hang on, how can you have such a jaunty tune about something that was so terrible? And I was like, yeah, I didn't intend it to be that way, but it kind of works. Because my fallback defense invariably was like, it's not as weird and fucked up as naming an airplane after your mother and then dropping an atom bomb and killing 150,000 people. That's fucked up.
Yeah. So then Kleptocracy mentions a journalist's torture and dissection by Saudi Arabia.
Oh, Khashoggi, yeah.
Yes, Khashoggi. And it's just the happiest song about something so horrible that I could think of.
Because I found, as I say, really, really obvious moralizing can be very clunky and ineffective.
Mm-hmm.
I have often preferred to couch my feelings and ideas in metaphors, which sometimes can cloud them to the point where people don't understand what the hell I'm on about. And there are millions of people to this day who don't know what Enola Gay is about.
Right.
But it was an opportunity at least to put the peg in the wall and then hang the ideas on it and discuss it using the song as a kind of leader. I think apart from Khashoggi, I don't name the other names, but you know who I'm talking about with dirty slogans on the red bus door, the exit and the disinfected beds. You can sit down with an idea about where you want to go and what you want to write, but in the end, when you're making a piece of art, and I'm sorry if I sound egotistical or big-headed calling our pop music art, but to me it is, so I'm sticking with that. It takes on its own life, and sometimes it goes off in a direction. You just go, holy shit, I didn't expect it to go this way, or this is not what I'd intended, or this doesn't seem to be what I wanted to say, but you know what? It works better this way as a piece of music, so I have to go with the flow.
When I listen to music, I'm not like someone who picks up on lyrics right away. I tend to sort of listen to music as a whole. And I'm listening to the song, preparing for this interview, and I'm like, I should check out these lyrics. And I look at the lyrics, I'm just like, oh my God, there's a lot going on here that I had no idea was happening in this song.
I mean, Kleptocracy was kind of a giveaway in the title.
Yeah, absolutely.
For those who don't know, it's Rule of Thieves.
Yes.
Or being ruled by thieves.
Right. When I was a kid, there was a band that I really liked called the Minutemen, and they were real funky and fun, but the lyrics were often metaphors and things. But that they would throw in references to political events of the mid-'80s and things happening in Central America and things like that. And I remember being such a fan of the band that I was like, what are they talking about? And I would like look it up and research it and figure out what the band was talking about, which really did shape me a bit as far as the way I think about the world. So I think there is something to doing that. And in a way that's...
I think so.
Yeah, and in a way, like you said, that's not hitting you over the head. The thing that's remarkable about Kleptocracy is, again, it's catchy and jaunty. It's even a song you can sing along to, but it's got this very pointed message to it. I think that's really cool.
Thank you. Well, then it's working.
And another thing that I think you balance really well with Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark in 2024, without naming names, there are a lot of bands that have been around for quite a while who either update themselves, their sound. I don't know if they're trying to go for the kids or what they're trying to do, that they just don't sound like themselves anymore. They just become kind of homogenous. Then you also have other bands that try too hard to sound like they did then, to where it just sounds very retro and very nostalgic.
Yeah, it's like a pastiche tribute band of themselves.
Yes. And what I really love about what you and Paul are doing with this album and the last bunch of albums is you balance somehow in the middle to me. There are very few bands that have been around as long as you guys that can really effectively do that. I think that's very remarkable that it doesn't sound retro, but it sounds like OMD, if you catch what I'm saying.
Well, then again, we're hitting our mark. One, we were determined that if we were going to release new music, it was going to be good. It had to be strong lyrics, strong melodies, strong ideas. Both of us have continued to make music after the band split up, and we learned new studio and programming techniques and computer programming techniques. So we had a handle on how to make modern music We weren't just locked off in our ivory tower back in 1983 or something. I think we were both able to employ those elements. But when you get to a certain age and you've made 13, 14 albums, it's really hard to come up with new ideas. It's really hard to come up with a melody you haven't done before or a beat that doesn't go, oh, that's the same drum pattern as blah, blah. So you have to work hard at it. And I think I like to think that more than anything else is that there's hard work goes into it. It's not just kind of like, yeah, we went in the studio and we threw together the first 10 things that came, and the good, the bad, the ugly, there it is as a new album, and it sounds like us because it is us. The tunes aren't good enough. The lyrics aren't good enough. And I think that a lot of bands, as Paul likes to say, a lot of bands release a new album because they need a logo for the new tour T-shirt, not because they want to make new records. They just need a new brand for this year's tour, And I think sadly that's the case. I'm not going to name any names. There are contemporaries of ours and other bands who I just listen to it and I go, just sounds like somebody's doing a pastiche of your earlier work. It's not fresh, it's not exciting, but yeah, it sounds like you guys, but it's nothing I want to hear. There's nothing new to me. It was important for us to do something that we felt was functioning in the modern era, that isn't just, trying to sound like OMD. We will sound like OMD because it's Paul and Andy writing music together. We're proud of the way we used to make music because we started out, we didn't know the rules. We weren't even consciously trying to break rules. We just didn't bloody know them. So we just did our own thing. Oh, that sounds all right. And people subsequently said, did you realize that you were doing this? And then you had a diminished fifth or something. And finally in the chorus, you put the fifth note on it and completed the chord. And I went, really? Okay, I had no fucking idea. Thanks for that. It's just, we just said when we got back together, we're going to sound like us, but we're going to make sure that it's quality, because over the years, we started swimming against the tide, and then the tide caught up with us. And since we reformed, we've stopped being the forgotten band of the late 70s, 80s. And actually, people say lots of nice things about us, like we're iconic and influential. Mm-hmm. And so finally, when we feel like we've got a place in the pantheon, recognition, the last thing we want to do is make shit records and people go, yeah, great band, but don't bother listening to any of their new stuff. It's shit, And if they play it live, just go to the bathroom.
Yeah. And I think people appreciate that too. I love this quote I saw from you. Playing a hit single is not like going to the fucking dentist.
I'd never understood why bands moan their ass off about, fucking I'm so bored of playing that song. Oh, what? The song that got you all the money, the song that's still played on the radio, the song that everybody loves, and you want to not play it, or even worse, do a stripped down acoustic version at half speed? Have some fucking respect,
You're finding a lot of younger fans, new fans on when you play now, right?
We are. And obviously it's down to a couple of things. We alluded to this earlier, this kind of postmodern era where nothing's in fashion, therefore nothing's out of fashion. And if you're considered to be seminal or iconic or just of value within a particular genre, then people will find you. And there's always a new generation of young people who get into electronic music because it's generally the most interesting music that's being made. There's only so many things you can do on a guitar, bass, and drums. Mm-hmm. Whereas computers and synthesizers and samplers give you a much broader palette so you can explore. And I think that younger bands have credited us as being influential, so their fans have discovered us. People go down wormholes on YouTube and, iTunes, and if you like this, you'll like that. And yeah, it's fantastic to see the age demographic changing. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I have friends who work in record stores, and I used to have a record store back in the very early 90s where it was very tribal. You only bought your punk rock records. You only bought your dance records. And I have friends who work now and say, you can't predict what anyone's going to buy because it's all over the place. It's like really nuts. It's like younger people now just have no genre restrictions, which is really cool.
It used to be, if somebody walked into a record store wearing these clothes with this haircut, you go, he's going to buy The Cure. He's going to buy John Mellencamp. Or
Right. I remember when I used to have my record store, I right away from someone walking in the door, I could be like, oh, you want to hear this new goth band? You might like them. Check it out. One thing that did blow my mind on this subject is my 10-year-old niece. She was visiting a couple years ago. And I asked her what music she was listening to, and she started naming off stuff. And then she said, and I really like this band Prefab Sprout. I was like,
really?
What? I talked to her mom, my sister-in-law, and she was like, yeah, she's discovered them on like a TikTok video or something. And now she's like really into them.
It is remarkable how music gets regurgitated to the next generation. Yeah, because something gets picked up and used on social media and they don't know where it came from. But again, it doesn't sound out of date because nothing is out of date anymore. In the early 80s, something that was recorded in the 50s sounded like something that was 25 years old. But now people consciously trying to sound like the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or Buddy Holly or Led Zeppelin or whatever. It's atomized.
Well, thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Great questions. Interesting.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. And one last thing. I have another interview in 2 hours with David J., formerly of Bauhaus.
Oh, you're kidding me. Wow.
So I'll get some Bauhaus synergy going on here.
Yeah, well, I'm expecting Bauhaus Reformation with a song called OMD Elevator, okay?
Yes, I will. I'll suggest it.
Thank you so much, Andy McCluskey and Michael Donaldson. And as always, thank you for listening to Spotlight On, a production of 23 Media Ventures. I'm your host and executive producer, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and edited by Michael Donaldson, with theme music by Q Burn's Abstract Message. If you'd like to support our work, please rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts, and then visit us online at spotlightonpodcast.com. There you'll find our free episode archive, weekly postings on our official blog, our online store, and a link to make a donation to support our work. Thanks for listening, be safe, and stay in touch.